D index. And how the D index is used in our LNOB analysis. Now let's see how we actually calculate our D index. So our D index, the formula, so some of us who are familiar with statistics or calculations, this might not seem as daunting. For some of us, it may feel a little more daunting, but I assure you it's a simple calculation. And because we now have we have a basis of understanding with our LNOB trees, it is easier to put in the elements for our D index formula. So the first element of our D index formula is N, which is our total number of groups that we are considering when calculating inequality. And just for example, it's our example in the video, for access to electricity, if we are considering, for country ESCAP, if we are considering 3 circumstances, we have wealth, which has 2 different options, the top 60% of household wealth and the bottom 40% of household wealth. Then in residence, we look at 2 different options as well, urban versus rural. And in education, we look at 3 different categories. So in this case, we would have 12 different groups or combinations. In our actual LNOB analysis, it would be more groups, but that's because we club together the education as many different combinations. However, for our example, we'll keep it simple. So we have 2 times 2 times 3, which is 10 groups. Okay, just checking if everyone was paying attention. It's 12 groups. So we're using 12 groups, and we are going to calculate the access of those 12 groups. And what we do is we take the p hat, which is our average access rate in the country, and this would be the same as our parent node in the tree. So that is our beginning node of our tree, LNOB tree, and that's the average access rate to electricity in the entire country. However, if we're looking at D index at the subnational level, then the average access rate is of that particular province. PI is the average access rate for each of those N groups. So we look at the access rate for each group, starting with group 1 all the way to group N. And we calculate, we take the average access of that group and subtract the average access rate of the country from that rate. I'll show you a full calculation of this in a little while, but this is just to define what each term is. BI is the weighted sample proportion of group I. So the sum of BI should equal 1. This is what proportion of our group is that particular sample group. So here we have a simple calculation of the D index. Let me take you through this. This material is also available on our website in case if anyone wants to if anyone would like to experiment with the calculation, you can feel free to download this Excel file from the website and do your own calculations. So here we have all the different combinations of groups using wealth, residence, and education. P hat is our average access to electricity, so that will be uniform throughout. And this is our average access per group. And when you see here, this is just a simple subtraction. This is a weighted, this is our weighted sample proportion. And the total calculation, which is automated here, would make our D index 0.08. Now, if we just play around with some numbers here and change, you will see that our D index changes quite significantly. So if these groups have a varied amount of access, you will see that our D index actually increases quite a bit. Similarly, if we were to make the access rates very close together, if the average access didn't change as much, it would actually indicate that there's not as much inequality. So it can just equalize. So it's a handy spreadsheet just to understand, okay, if you have a simple example to see how the D-index is actually calculated and to experience that. However, if, let's say for our analysis, we have many more circumstances and many more combination groups, so it would become more complicated to do this on Excel, but our R program is able to do that quite efficiently using all the data that we've already input. So this is a quick overview of just the theory of D-index, and of course we will, in the next part of the session, we will go through the actual results that are published on our LNOB tool. But right now, if anyone has any questions, I invite you to turn on your video, and if you would like to ask questions about D-index or anything generally about what I've said today, you can feel free to do that.
Sajal, I also wanted to just add something in while people are perhaps thinking. The circumstances that you show that are used for the D-index to calculate the D-index are actually, for those of you who were here yesterday, are actually the same ones, the same circumstances that we use in our LNOB analysis for each indicator. So if you remember, we gave a lot of examples from stunting, for example, which was included, or early childhood education, I think was the most common one. And we had circumstances such as the sex of the child, the education of the mother, the wealth of the household, the residence, and the number of children under 5 in the household. So these would be the same circumstances that are being used and their intersections to calculate the small groups that we use in the D-index, right? So this is just a little bit of just a quick observation, and maybe, yeah, one question we have is why we need the D-index. Maybe a quick overview of that would be great, Sajal.
So our D-index, when we combine it with our access rate, we find that it gives us a more holistic picture of inequality, because access rate, it just tells us what the level of access is in a certain area. When we look at the D-index, we can compare with one number if there's inequality in a specific area. So is amongst all the groups, what is the level of inequality amongst those groups for a certain service or barrier? So the D-index is, the reason we've included it is because it's a complementary figure for the access rates, which together give us a better picture of how good or bad a certain indicator is doing in a certain area. And we will go deeper into this. Selsha will go deeper into this in the next part of the session. Are there any other questions on D-index?
Looks like we're good. So maybe we can move on to the next.
Selsha, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sajad. I'll share my screen. No. Or maybe Sejal, if I could ask you to share, would that be okay?
Just one note that which we will also cover later, but we do have, oh, sorry, where is, go ahead, Selsha, actually. I think you have the Menti mode.
No, I can actually access Menti mode somehow. It still shows you as presenting. Ah, wait. Okay. Would you like to say a few words here before I move? Yeah. Okay.
So before we go on, so in the beginning, if you remember, we have two different ways of looking at the D index. One is a calculation for our opportunities, and then we have a separate calculation for our barriers. This is because D index is generally calculated using it's a distribution of a positive outcome. So for our barrier indicators, such as stunting or violence against women indicators, we actually use the calculation of absence of that barrier, which means that when we calculate the D index, we are calculating what is the absence of stunting, what is the inequality amongst absence of stunting. So no stunting, so people who don't have that barrier against them. So this allows us to keep the same interpretation for the D index, whether it's an opportunity or barrier, and it also helps us compare the indicators together.
Thank you very much, Sejal. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you again this morning and talking about inequality. Let's move now from theory to practice and analyze inequality of opportunities in Mongolia through the D index. So before we start, we would like to hear from you on two issues. First, did identifying further behind and further ahead groups in a given SDG indicator help you understand overall inequality in that indicator? Looking forward to hearing from you through Mentimeter, or alternatively, feel free to raise your hand to seek the floor, or put your response on the chat if you can't access Mentimeter. This is also coming back to the question of why do we need the index? Just to understand if seeing furthest behind and furthest ahead, the two groups, would that be sufficient for you to have an understanding of inequality in that indicator in Mongolia? So in a way to see if yesterday's trees were sufficient from inequality perspective. I see my colleagues shared the response, the link to Mentimeter also. We have a few results so far. Maybe I can start showing. Okay, so that's good. The furthest behind and furthest ahead are already helping. I'm not sure if if participants have the possibility to raise their hands, but if you'd like to also say a few words in this, if you want to expand, feel free to join in. But I think so far it looks like identifying the further behind and further ahead groups was helpful. So the trees will be giving a good indication for inequality. And the aim of this, partly the aim of this presentation today, is also to show you this D index, which is an alternative measure, but will be I'll be showing you towards the end that the both are complementing one another. Okay, so let's move to our second question. Which inequality measure do you often use in your area of work? Feel free to respond through Mentimeter, Zoom, or chat. Raise your hand and we'll give you the floor. So this is an open-ended question. We've already alluded to one of the standard measures of inequality, but there are plenty of them. Yeah, exactly. Gini-Palma ratio. When it comes to access to opportunities, I mean, this Gini-Palma, we see them more in inequality of outcomes, right? We can see them in income. We see them also in consumption, expenditures and income. Palma ratio. There's one more called quantile ratio. I don't know if you've heard of that, but that also relates to income and expenditure measures. So inequality of outcomes. Yeah, levels of access by group can be compared. Okay, so thank you very much for that. Let's go deeper into analysis of Mongolia with inequality. So as we go through the country analysis for Mongolia, we'll be relying on mixed data, just like yesterday, particularly from the recent version, 2018. And this mixed data, as you already know, it allows us to estimate the index in all these 16 indicators that are available on our platform at national and also at subnational levels. Similar to yesterday, we'll be sharing results from the same 5 regions that mix collected data from. So in today's exploration, we'll be focusing on 2 indicators in particular, the ones that are highlighted in blue. We'll be focusing on one opportunity indicator, that's internet usage, and then one barrier indicator, that's violence against women is justified. Okay, so let's start with the internet usage among men and women in Mongolia. So this indicator measures if individuals use the internet in the past 3 months. We bombarded you yesterday with lots of graphs. So I'm not sure if you remember, but as of 2018 in Mongolia, on average, 68% of people, men and women together, aged 15 to 49, used internet during the past 3 months. This could be once a week or less than a week, but they definitely used it at least once in the past 3 months. By now, and with yesterday's explorations, we know that this average masks lots of inequalities across regions and as well as individual and across individual and household circumstances. So for instance, while 87% of people in Ulaanbaatar at the very bottom of the bar chart has used internet, only 46% of women and men aged 15 to 49 in Western region used the internet in the past 3 months. The LNOB tree yesterday also showed us that the furthest behind group was consisting of individuals who were 35 and above and who lived in poorer households. On average, this group had a 23% in internet usage rate. Now, that's a big difference from the average of 68%. And if you consider the furthest ahead group, they have on average 97% internet usage rate, and they consist of younger people, 15 to 34, and who live in relatively richer households. So as we divide them, bottom 40 in wealth distribution versus top 60 in the wealth distribution. So these are a bit of, reminding ourselves the situation with levels of access in different areas. from yesterday's exploration. But what about having a single statistic for inequality in using internet based on all circumstances and not just averages or overall averages? So that's where the D-index comes in. So on this bar chart, let's look at this bar chart closely. On average, the index at national level, which is the gray bar, is 0.2, which falls right where we expect the index to fall in general, as we showed you earlier. There are three provinces, three regions, Western, Kangai, and Eastern, where there's higher than average D index when compared to the national level, while Ulaanbaatar exhibits the lowest inequality. Recall that where coverage is high, inequality is low. They're very much related to one another. Now, given the common range of D index between 0.01 and 0.3, we note that inequality in internet usage is considerably high in the Western region, where usage was also lowest. Let's now look more in detail to the relationship between access and inequality. When Sejal was replying to one of the questions in chat, she mentioned this, and we'll be spending a bit time on that relationship. Our legend remains similar to LNOB tree analysis with our color coding. Dark blue is the preferred situation with higher access and lower inequality, while dark orange should ring the alarm bells as it represents lower access and higher inequality. So when we put them together, the access and inequality, this scatter plot comes out. This graph shows the relationship between access and inequality across the 5 regions. Ulaanbaatar and Central region have the ideal situation of lower inequality and higher usage. So they're on the bottom right quadrant and in dark blue. Among the 3 provinces in the top left quadrant, which represents the worst case scenario of lower access and higher inequality, Western region has the largest inequality and lowest usage. LNOB trees can complement this and give a bit more substance to this result and help us understand what's really happening. For example, in the Western region, furthest behind group has a 5% internet usage rate, while furthest ahead has a 93% usage rate. That's a pretty wild range. In provinces where internet usage is less than average, the 3 dark orange dots that you see on the top left, the index is relatively high as expected but may warrant different policy priorities. So we need to understand which groups are left behind. For instance, in Western region, the first split in our LNOB tree yesterday occurred by education. In Kangai and in Eastern regions, it was wealth that split the people first. Residents played a role in Western region, but not so much in Kangai and Eastern regions. Hence, there are different policy priority actions across different regions in boosting internet usage among men and women. And this could give an initial a map of where different regions in a country lie and what sort of issues are there. That information can come from the LNOB trees. So in that sense, they're complementing one another and giving, as mentioned earlier, a holistic picture of where the country stands in their particular SDG indicator. So we've looked at Mongolia at national level, a bit at subnational level. Let's now move to the broader regional analysis across Asia Pacific. There are 19 dots on this map, and they show all the countries for which similar analysis was carried out in similar periods. So they're not so distant from one another, survey of year-wise. So across these 19 countries listed here in this bar chart, Mongolia ranks 10th and much below the regional average D index for Asia Pacific. In Central Asia, Mongolia remains behind Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan, but ahead of Tajikistan. Unfortunately, we don't have any comparable countries with available data from East and Northeast Asia, where mix and DHS data are not collected. So the comparability is maybe a bit more restricted here. But this gives us an idea of where Mongolia is in terms of inequality in internet usage. When we look at the access rate, Mongolia is positioned slightly better here, as it ranks 7th among all countries. So access is a bit high relatively, but inequality is higher also. This time Mongolia is behind Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, but ahead of Turkmenistan and Tajikistan. So again, our color coding remains similar to what we have showed yesterday, with the dark oranges indicating the worst case scenarios and the blue ones, the preferred ideal cases. When we focus on access and D-index in Asia Pacific region, bringing the two components together, we see Mongolia at the bottom right quadrant, which represents the ideal case of lower inequality and higher access relative to the Asia Pacific average. Among this group of countries, however, Mongolia still has room to cover to join the ranks of the top 6 countries. If you see the 6 countries at the far bottom right, the blue dots. How much improvement, you may ask? Well, access rate among those 6 countries is about 84% on average, while Mongolia is at 68%. So the improvement would entail that access rate, or not, internet usage in the last 3 months will need to increase from 68% to 84% for Mongolia to join to those 6 countries. At the same time, inequality will need to decrease. Currently, as you remember, the index in Mongolia was 0.2. The average inequality in those 6 countries at the bottom right is 0.1, which means that inequality in Mongolia would have to decrease by half. So that's a tall order, but there could be a nice direction to go to expand coverage and lower inequality. So now let's take a moment here as we move into our barrier indicator. We've covered the opportunity indicator so far. And remember what Sejal was mentioning before I started. So to ensure comparability, we modified the D-index such that barriers and opportunities can have the similar interpretation. So the lower the D-index, lower the inequality. And to do this, we calculate the index for the barriers by focusing on the absence of a barrier, which is not so intuitive immediately. But if you think about a barrier like stunting that was mentioned, we would like to see lower inequality in stunting, but to be able to compare barriers and opportunities, we look into inequality in the absence of stunting. So we want lower inequality in absence of a barrier. So with this reminder, let me move to our barrier indicator, which as you remember is our violence against women is justified indicator. And just before that, a quick reminder that our color coordination remains the same, but the legend is slightly different now. Lower prevalence and lower inequality is the best case scenario, followed by lower prevalence and higher inequality, higher prevalence, lower inequality, and higher prevalence and higher inequality. So in analyzing a barrier, let's take the example of violence against women is justified, and let's together now navigate the tool. My colleagues can share, if they haven't yet shared on the chat, the address LNOB.unescap.org. And here, please select the indicator violence against women justified, Mongolia for the country, and 2018 for the year. So I'll wait a bit as you go through. There's a video is playing. This one is for a different indicator, but you can do the same for violence against women. It would be nice if you can join us in this navigation, because we'll be asking some questions, some pop quiz questions, and it will help you to answer those questions if you're on the tool. When you come, after selecting Mongolia 2018 and women and violence against women justified, on the page that appears, please move to the third panel, because the first two panels show you the trees at national level, the first one, the second one, the subnational. So it's the third panel where we start seeing the index. So I hope you had a chance to go to the tool. So let's start with the D index sorry, let's start with the prevalence first to set the context a little bit. You'll on this third panel, you'll first see a bar chart for prevalence rate of the barrier by regions in Mongolia. So when we have a closer look, we see that over 10% of women in 3 provinces in Western, Eastern, and Kangai specifically consider violence against women as justified for one of the following reasons. If she goes out without telling him, if she neglects the children, if she argues with him being the partner, if she refuses sex with him, if she burns the food. So there are 5 reasons for which violence might be justified. So the average for the entire country is 9%. That 9% of women aged 15 to 49 considering violence against women justified for any one of those reasons. And if you recall, we've looked into this a little bit yesterday, but again, there were too many, so you may not remember. Just a reminder here. LNOB trees told us that the furthest behind group was women from bottom 40% wealth distribution and women with lower education. Among that group, 23% considered violence against women justified. Furthest ahead group was younger women who are tertiary educated and come from top 60% households in wealth distribution. So there's a big gap, 4% to 23%. The furthest behind and furthest ahead is already giving us the range for the inequality, if you will. But then we are going to convert this to the index for a single metric. And just we see that prevalence of this barrier is lowest in Ulaanbaatar. So let's do a little quiz. On the chat, you'll see a link to the Mentimeter question. Maybe you're still on Mentimeter. So this is a multiple choice question, which is the index for this barrier at national level higher or lower than or about the same as the D index for internet usage? And just a reminder, the D index for internet usage was 0.2. So the question is, do you think inequality or the D index for this indicator is higher than this, lower than this, or about the same? Let's give you a bit of time for this. You can also feel free to type your answer in the chat if you're not on Mentimeter, but I hope you'll be able to go to the tool. We have 10 responses that are equally divided so far between about the same and higher. So the index is expected at least as okay. Maybe I don't know if I'll also check myself to check if there are any responses there. Okay, one response came for the lower, so let's reveal. And this is something that you would see in the third panel after the prevalence. chart. So the inequality is much lower. So that first, the one answer was correct. Inequality, the average inequality in violence against women not justified is 0.03 as a national average, and overall inequality, is in this indicator is low, and Ulaanbaatar leads the way, where almost all women consider that violence against women is not justified. And also recall that there's a relationship between prevalence and inequality in the places where you have too much higher prevalence. Inequality can be low. Thank you for your replies. Let's put them together as we've put it earlier in a scatter plot to show where countries are. Now you'll see that the quadrants are a little bit mirror image reversed. We can see here all the provinces across the spectrum. If you're on the platform, you can actually hover around these dots and see what province that particular dot is. So Ulaanbaatar represents the ideal case with lower than average prevalence and inequality on the bottom left quadrant, the blue dot. Western region, on the other hand, is on the top right quadrant, representing the worst situation. So we can again see the regions across the spectrum. So now that we have seen prevalence and inequality within Mongolia, let's navigate forward to regional analysis, which is the next panel on the webpage where we left off you. If you exited the page, please go back to lnob.unescap.org. I hope the platform is still open on your browser. And here, as a reminder, you would select violence against women, justified, Mongolia for the country, and then 2018 for the year. On the page that appears, please move to the fourth panel now for regional analysis. And as you come there, you'll see a number of alternative visuals to allow for a regional look for this indicator, focusing again on countries with mixed data and from similar period. Similar period meaning similar around 2018, because that's our base year for Mongolia. So in this map, we can see the we can see furthest behind and furthest ahead in each country and see how they change over time. And we can also compare prevalence rates and dissimilarity index across the region in this regional analysis. I hope most of you are there, and while maybe others are getting there, we'd like to ask another question. Considering our barrier indicator, violence against women is justified, what do you think is the ideal case? Higher prevalence and lower inequality, or lower prevalence and lower inequality? Feel free to write in the chat. Also the floor, we can open the floor if you'd like to indicate your answer. Yeah, I think the tendency is going in the right direction. We want lower prevalence for barriers and lower inequality. Thank you very much for your responses. So let's now look at Mongolia in regional perspective for violence against women indicator. So relative to Asia Pacific average for countries with available data, Mongolia has very low inequality in violence against women not justified. Again, just to remind ourselves that we are looking at the absence of a barrier, so that later on we can compare opportunity indicators and barrier indicators together. And Relative to Asia Pacific average for countries with available data, again, Mongolia also has very low prevalence for violence against women for this absence of this barrier. As such, Mongolia is similar to countries like Thailand and Kazakhstan, where prevalence of violence against women is justified is lower, along with lower inequality. Again, relative to Asia Pacific average. Again, we're taking two components together into a scatter plot. Our usual, I think, result appears, but this time again, the ideal cases are on the bottom left quadrant. And here we see Mongolia encircled in black, along with Thailand and Kazakhstan. Now let's contextualize inequality across all indicators for which we have data. So we are now going into that. The whole purpose of this different treatment of the index across opportunities and barriers is to be able to see them all together in a meaningful way, such that they are comparable. So here you see all the 16 indicators for which we have data in Mongolia in 2018, and we show their D index. There are 8 indicators in dark blue with very low inequality, indicating or showing the positive side in Mongolia in these SDG indicators. On the other side, there are 8 indicators. On the other side, there are 8 indicators in dark orange, where inequality is higher and access is lower. This is relative to the average D index across all indicators, of course. The issue is of particular concern for access to clean fuel and tertiary and secondary education completion for the age groups that were discussed yesterday. So 20 to 35-year-olds and 35+-year-olds. It's also important to see here that policies may need to focus more on opportunities than barriers, as the dark blue ones at the bottom, they're more the barriers, and we are seeing lower inequality in the barriers in Mongolia, but we are seeing dark oranges more in the opportunities. So if there was a prioritization, probably it would be better to look at, to address the dark orange ones where there's high inequality and low access. So this is a graph that those of you who were with us yesterday, this chart was we went through this chart in detail. I don't want to go through it again. I just wanted to highlight that the indicators for which we have large gaps between furthest behind and furthest ahead, those are also the indicators where the index is very high. So they're complementing to one another, but it is certainly much easier to digest the message through a D-index chart than this chart if your purpose is to look into inequality. This chart is also very helpful and meaningful when you're looking at the differences between furthest behind and furthest ahead, comparing to the average and looking at the gaps. Of course, it has much more information. The D-index basically takes all in and gives you one metric out of it. Now let's do another opinion poll, but first please go to the other indicators panel at the end of LNOB page and select the D-index and prevalence tab. For those of you who may have joined just now, it would be nice if you can go to www.lnob.unescap.org. In the chat, we have a link to our platform. And on this platform, you would choose Mongolia for a country, 2018 for the year, and you can choose any one of the indicators. It doesn't matter at this point because we're going to the last panel where we'll be comparing all indicators in terms of their inequality and prevalence. So I hope you're getting there on the platform, and we're almost there, I promise. Here's your question. You can do this also. You can reply to this in the chat, or if you like through Mentimeter, or the floor is also open if you'd like to raise your hand to access the floor. So the question is, according to the scatter plot graph that you will be seeing when you navigate to the last panel, which SDG indicators or which SDG indicator in this case do you think require prioritized action? Access to bank accounts, access to drinking water, or clean fuel? And all three are opportunities. So currently we have 2 for clean fuel and 5 for basic drinking water. If you're on the platform, you want to see the darkest orange color on the platform and not in the questions. It could be a trick question. Okay, so we have again our usual 10 responses, which gives me the signal to move on. The correct answer is clean fuel. The inequality is highest and prevalence is lowest in this. So that would require, according to the scattered plot graph, at least it would be clean fuel, improving access to clean fuel would be the policy priority. See here, you see, this is the chart that I was hoping that you would get to. Dark orange dots on the top left quadrant where access is low and inequality is high. In accessing the listed opportunities should be prioritized in policy implementation. The ones that we have here up top, the dark orange ones are clean fuel, basic sanitation, and internet usage at household level, and access to secondary and tertiary education at individual level. So this graph could give us an idea of what to prioritize if the prioritization criteria was to look at access and inequality in those SDG indicators. So a final question, and this could be on the chat or on Mentimeter. Would you use the index to understand inequalities in SDG indicators? And this could be using the D-index on our platform or adopting the D-index and using it for other indicators that you might be interested in. That looks great. Thank you so much for the positive response. So I think this is where I stop, and we can open it up for a question and answer session, Q&A session, and we can discuss. I understand there are some questions in the chat, and we can dig deeper there.
Selcha, if I may come in, we have a couple of interesting questions in the chat by Mohammed, and I tried to answer it on the chat, but I think maybe it's worth discussing about it as well a little bit, because obviously we were looking at the violence against women, if it's considered justified. So that's the indicator that the question was referring to, I believe. And Mohammed was asking if we had any evidence that there might be cultural belief elements involved regarding this justification of violence. Now, I direct Mohammed to the trees with religion and ethnicity to find his answer. And I think this is the value of the tool, right? Because we can make assumptions, but when we actually look at the trees at the national level, or even at the subnational level, might be even more interesting. We can see the nuance, and if when we include these additional indicators, if they do show up in the tree, it means that they do make a difference, right? But if not, it means that they're not significant enough. It's other reasons that matter: the education level, the sometimes, I don't know, number of children in the household, the wealth of the household. It may depend on other issues. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, I agree. I think this you know, the D-index and the trees, they're giving us a descriptive overview. We're unable to go into like a deeper analysis of what's deriving exactly the views. And I mean, these are heavily grounded. That indicator is a heavily grounded gender norm. It proxies gender norms prevalent in the society, and cultural factors, religious factors, they could play a role. Untangling the impact of those different factors, which are also difficult to measure, because in a survey, you know, we may not be able to identify all those people and have a big sample. That's I think something that academics who study violence against women look into a lot. But I think from our perspective, in the computation of the index, because it's such a data-driven approach, and we need a large sample to be able to, you know, within those groups, we have the restrictions also such that there are enough observations. Now, in the D-index for I think violence against women, there are, I think, 24 groups in our analysis. And we need to make sure that there are enough observations, enough women in all those. If we add there more circumstances, like some cultural, language, or any other, it doesn't have to be those, that means we're going to exponentially increase our circumstances, which means that the number of people in each group will also decrease. And that could give us a bit of less power in being able to say that the average of this group is accurate and it's representative of that group in the society. So I think there's that cost of expanding circumstances in the D-index and making, you know, it could lead to biases. But I think it's very important to start with D-index, have an idea, the single metric, and then go into the trees to improve our understanding of why are we seeing this high D-index, who are deriving it, who are deriving the range, the furthest behind and the furthest ahead. But then ultimately, the tool would not be able to answer any questions that come close to like the causality issue of what's behind. And they're very sensitive anyways. Like the more variables we add, the D-index can change. Adding more variables which might not have enough observations will change the sample that we're studying. So it might end up to a different D-index. So there's always, like in practice, there are lots of questions that we need to address before, you know, selecting circumstances that will go into the computation of the index. But great question. Thank you very much, Mohammed.
Yes, and I thank you, Salsa, and you actually know a lot more about this subject than many of us. It's good to have you answering it. One other thing, just for Mohammed and for others who are maybe exploring the platform right now, if you go, as we said yesterday, you know, you can look at the standard analysis, which is the first thing you see, right, when you look at the website, but you can also select the analysis, including religion, etc. When you do that, even the D-index changes, right? So it's exactly what Salsa just said. So if you do that, let's say at the province level, you will notice that the D index may increase usually or decrease, or it depends, right? So it's exactly the point that Celso just made. So because the way of the D index is calculated, it calculates the average of each and every one of these groups. And obviously, the more groups they are, maybe the more probability there is that they're further from the average. And but we should always be careful and cautious if we add more circumstances. That's why we don't, when we do this analysis, both for the trees and for the D index, we are very selective about which circumstances we use. We don't want to throw everything in there. It has to be things that make sense and that we think can help our interpretation, because we don't want to compromise the statistical validity of what we're exploring. But it's a great question, right to the heart of our analysis.
And we are not using it anymore, but like I think when World Bank came up with this D index, and they were more focusing on this human opportunity index, but the different decompositions, I saw Mohammed also comment there, different decompositions could be done also to understand, you know, which circumstance is deriving the D index, which is, I think the methodology was called shapely decomposition. So as you are seeing the D index, you could see which circumstance, when you decompose the components of the D index, you could see for every country, for every province, the inequality, the D index, how is it decomposed across different circumstances. But these are very largely statistical procedures, and we're looking at very descriptive issues. So, you know, again, there's nothing that we could say about causality here. For colleagues who are interested in violence against women or domestic violence, intimate partner violence, there are very interesting academic research that happens where people are trying to identify causal relationships, for example, between education and violence. That's a very contentious issue. Employment status and violence. There are many different hypotheses. I'm sure most of the colleagues here, they're familiar with these, but usually people are looking into natural experiments where something happened, a policy change happened in the country, and then you can try to identify the causal link between the circumstance you're interested in and the indicator. In the case of education, for example, the change in education or the education reforms have been used a lot. You know, you're extending from basic 5-year education to 8-year education, and then this could give us a natural experiment to see how education can help women avoid or minimize their exposure to violence, or, you know, have better protection, basically, if violence occurred. But yeah, there's lots of interesting research happening where they're digging deeper into one country and, you know, exploring it more. In our case, as we're covering a region of over 50 countries, but we have data from close to 30 countries, it's a bit more difficult to get into deeper analysis. But we hope will inspire you and other colleagues to in other countries to try to understand more about, you know, where these inequalities are coming from, what can we do about the furthest behind groups.
Great. Well, thank you guys for those wonderful questions that helped bring everything together. Oh, we have one more. To compare. There's one more in the chat.
So for the comparisons, I guess these are the 5 sub-regions for the subnational when we're computing the D index. So we know, imagine, I think there's around 15,000. I need to double check. how many people are from Mongolia, but basically we know every individual where they're from, and they have their weights. So we don't do anything at macro level. We are just using this the sample design and the sample weights or the sampling strategy of the survey to be able to come up with the numbers for that subnational disaggregation. So we don't do any other normalization taking into account, you know, the population of regions, but they're already implicit in the individual weights or the household women's weights in the survey or the household weights in the survey. So we follow whatever mix UNICEF mix is doing in this sense. I hope that clarifies. With pleasure.
Okay, so just to close this, before we close this part of session 2, we were wondering if everyone would be okay to turn on their cameras so we could get a nice screenshot of the ending of our session. And after we can do that, we will also send a link for the evaluation form to be completed. But before that, yes, it'd be great to put faces also to all the names that we see in the chat. You know, online can be a little bit funny at times. You feel like you're speaking to yourself. But thank you for the questions and the engagement today. They really helped break the computer screen barrier for us. But yes, it would be wonderful if we could put some faces to the names. Seems we have nice new faces also joining in, which is always great. Just give people a couple of more minutes in case. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming on, and nice to see a lot of you here. I'm going to share a QR code for our evaluation form. So if you can either use the QR code, or my colleague will also put a link into the chat. So if everyone has a few minutes to go ahead and fill out that form for us, would be very grateful.
Sajal, you took the screenshot, right?
Oh,
No. Let's go back.
No, I took a few.
You took a few. Thank you, Sergio. Okay, back to the evaluation form.
oh, okay, back to the evaluation form.
Thank you. Okay, colleagues, I hope you have had the time to fill in the evaluation form for us. We realize the evaluation form is only in English right now. We will be sending a follow-up email to everyone with the evaluation form also in Mongolian for those of you who were not able to fill it in. So expect to see that in the next week, early next week. So before we close, a couple of things. One is that in about a minute or so, we will stay on, Sejal, Selsha, and I, in case anybody wants to ask any question they have with regards to the CART methodology, the D-index, and the platform. We can also, go through the platform with people who wish to do that. I think our interpreters will stay as well, so we can take your questions in Mongolian. Don't be afraid to ask us in Mongolian, because we can always switch to the interpretation ourselves and listen to your questions in English. So don't be afraid to ask things in Mongolian as well for the coffee break Q&A session. But before we do that, I just really wanted to thank you very, very much for attending, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to learn about the CART methodology and the D-index. We hope you have found it useful, and we hope that you will be using the platform, exploring it on your own, sending us questions. Feel free to send us questions on anything that you've heard or learned. We will also, I believe through the registration, you probably have our emails, but we will also be sharing our email addresses with you, so that you can ask us anything you want with regards to this work. I also really wanted particularly to thank Ms. Kuslen, who's been a great focal point for us and a great supporter of this work. She mobilized you for this training, and she's also been extremely supportive from the beginning. And we look forward to working with you further. We have already indicated that there will be another training which is going to be more technical. It's going to be focusing on the codes that is required to produce this analysis. We know there are limitations to the analysis we shared with you, because we only have the mixed survey that we're working on, but we think that if people, especially people who are familiar with statistics, can learn to use this code as well, then they can run the analysis to any data set they get their hands on. So it's going to opens a lot of opportunities for more data-based analysis on leaving no one behind and in social sciences in general. So we're very excited to keep working with Mongolia on this. These are a few words from me. I also really want to thank my colleagues Sejal and Selsha, who were fantastic in their presentations, and Ploy and Nana, who are behind the scenes. And Dolchko, if you're here, I don't know if my colleague Dolchko from the UN country team in Mongolia is here. Also a special thanks to her as well for her incredible support in mobilizing all of you. This is from us. I don't know if Ms. Kuslen, you wanted to also say anything before we moved on to the coffee break. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. So first of all, thank you very much for this training. This training is very timely and important. I think this strengthening the national capacities is very important right now, while we are working on the SDG 2030. So also here, I would like to express our appreciation for Ms. Ermina, Ms. Sejal, Mr. Selsha, and all the other ESCAP team, and also the UNRC team for organizing this training workshop, and looking for the third session workshop. And I think the LNOB platform and these tools, diagnostic tools, are very important for the policymakers for capacity building to develop measures and policies and programs that prioritize those who are furthest behind. And also I would like to thank the interpreters who worked during this 2 days training. And also I would like to thank my colleagues for assisting and working as a team for this training. Thank you all.
Definitely many thanks to the interpreters and to your colleagues as well from our side as well. Thank you very, very much. So as I mentioned, we are staying on. If anybody wants to ask a question, we're here. We can take your questions in Mongolian or in English. The rest of you, we hope you have a very nice day, and we will share. I think a couple of people have asked for the recording of the first day and the second day. We will share those with you next week. We will share our email addresses and also our all of the material that you saw today in English and in Mongolian as well. So our presentations in English and in Mongolian as well. So you can further study them during your free time. Thank you, everyone.